You may have seen photos of this view on social media. The perfect view of the London skyline. St. Paul's Cathedral, the Shard, the London Eye. You can see all of these from Primrose Hill. There's a real buzz here on one day of the year in particular, New Year's Eve. There's perhaps no better spot in the city to watch the annual fireworks display. But as 2023 turns into 2024, everything changes. Even before the fireworks begin, chaos breaks out. Emergency lights are flashing everywhere. And even before the new year begins, a boy loses his life here. New Year's Eve is one of the most demanding days of the year for emergency responders. Whether it's the fire department, police, or emergency medical services, they are in constant demand on this one night. And in a city like London, the situation is, of course, even more intense. On December 31st, 2023, the police are called to Primrose Hill around 11:40 p.m. Primrose Hill isn't actually intended to be one of the designated New Year's Eve event zones. In London, those are primarily located around Trafalgar Square and the London Eye along the Thames. For several years now, there has also been a ticketing system in place there to help regulate the crowds a bit. The tickets are free, but the reservations help organizers implement the necessary safety measures for such large crowds. As mentioned, Primrose Hill is not one of those designated event zones. Just like any other day, people can simply go there on New Year's Eve. The spot has always been popular, but the many photos on social media likely intensified the crowds on New Year's Eve. While there are some uniformed police officers on duty to monitor the situation, there are no entry checks, and when an emergency call comes in at 11:40 p.m., the worst fears are confirmed. When the emergency medical technicians arrive, the situation on Primrose Hill is chaotic. Eyewitnesses later describe how about 40 police officers had arrived and cordoned off a boy who appeared to be seriously injured. 3 ambulances were reportedly on the scene, but after about 10 minutes, the emergency responders had to give up. Even before the New Year's Eve fireworks heralded the new year, 16-year-old Harry Pitman was pronounced dead in the park. His friends, who had planned to watch the fireworks with him, stood by in shock. At first, it's not entirely clear what happened. There's talk of a knife. Harry was stabbed in the neck with it. According to several revelers, the police are doing their best to check everyone trying to leave the park. They're searching for the perpetrator or the weapon, but the checks are in vain. Whoever fatally injured Harry Pitman, he or she left the park unhindered. While thousands of people in the city are celebrating and embracing one another, Harry's family's world is falling apart. On January 1st, 2024, the park remains closed to the public. The police are there collecting evidence. The search for the murder weapon continues, unfortunately without success, but at least an empty knife sheath is found. The police suspect that the perpetrator lost it while fleeing or threw it away on purpose. Even though the murder weapon itself is missing, the sheath allows for some conclusions. The murder weapon was not a normal kitchen or pocket knife, but rather something like a hunting knife. And given how large the sheath is, the blade must have been about 15 centimeters long. By any stretch of the imagination, this is not a knife you'd carry along for unexpected outdoor adventures. The motive is a mystery to investigators, because Harry Pitman is just a perfectly normal 16-year-old boy. He attends a London college and is very popular with many friends. The boy has never had any run-ins with the police, and aside from alcohol, he has never taken any drugs. Neither he nor his friends had any conflicts with others. Harry also wasn't carrying any weapons on New Year's Eve that he could have used to scare anyone. He was just a 16-year-old boy who wanted to watch the fireworks over London with his friends. A 16-year-old boy who is now dead. On January 2nd, a vigil for Harry is held in a London park. In addition to his parents and siblings, many local residents have also come. On January 6th, 2024, it is announced that someone has been arrested in connection with the murder. A boy, also just 16 years old, from London's Westminster district, Reece Lloyd Hall. The boy had caught the investigators' attention in images from surveillance cameras. Reece then showed up at a police station with his father to come forward as a witness. However, the boy quickly became entangled in contradictions. In the end, he even denied being the boy in the footage at all. Apparently, during the questioning, he realized he was acting suspiciously and panicked. In any case, the situation quickly became clear to the police. The 16-year-old was arrested on suspicion of murdering Harry, who was the same age. Reece and Harry did not know each other. They had never met. Both boys were out with their respective groups of friends. Reece was there with his girlfriend, his sister, and a few friends. According to witnesses, Harry was pretty hyped up on New Year's Eve. One of the police officers on patrol at Primrose Hill recalls having a brief chat with Harry. The boy practically jumped on him, but then had a totally friendly conversation with him for a moment. The teenager was clearly a bit tipsy, and the police officers know how to handle that sort of thing. Then, the 16-year-old moved on to the next person and started another conversation with a stranger. Harry was in high spirits, but he was also just a 16-year-old boy. And then, the situation spiraled completely out of control while police officers stood by. Suddenly, Harry's white t-shirt was red. The boy was clutching his neck, where he was bleeding heavily from a wound. Harry turned back toward the police officers, with whom he had been joking moments earlier, and called for help. A short time later, he collapsed unconscious. We know all of this very clearly because there is a video of the incident. It shows Harry accidentally bumping into a young man with his back. This young man is one of Reece's friends. The young man then slaps Harry on the back of the head to let him know that he's getting a little too close. Harry turns around and a scuffle ensues. Harry punches Reece's friend, who stumbles and falls to the ground. At this point, Reece himself is standing several meters away from the scene, together with his girlfriend. He is not involved in this conflict. Other people from the group of friends intervene, and Harry's friends also join in, so that the two groups are now facing off against each other. The video shows Reece approaching Harry's group in a confrontational and aggressive manner. But then, the situation takes a turn. Reece reaches into his waistband and pulls out a knife. At that moment, Harry raises his arm to strike at Reece, who plunges his knife into Harry's neck. A young woman who had gone to Primrose Hill to watch the fireworks had taken out her smartphone well before midnight and recorded a few videos. Instead of the fireworks, she filmed, at first without realizing it, the murder of Harry Pitman. And when the defendant goes to trial, the footage becomes the most important piece of evidence. When confronted with it, the defendant ultimately admits that he was the one who fatally injured Harry. In 2025, Reece, now 18 years old, goes on trial. He is charged with murder. The defendant claims he only intended to strike Harry with a knife's sheath, but after reviewing the video footage, the jury finds this unlikely. It is clearly visible that Reece thrusts the knife straight into Harry's neck, with the tip pointing downward. It is also important to note that Reece admits he never assumed at any point that Harry was carrying a stabbing weapon, or intended to pose any serious threat to him. It is particularly ironic that Harry himself had previously witnessed a stabbing. In June 2023, he lost a close friend in such a crime. His defense attorney says this severely traumatized the teenager. Afterward, he suffered from cannabis-induced paranoia. He had bought the knife from his friend shortly before, so he could defend himself if necessary. If Harry has already witnessed a knife attack, it's clear that he's afraid. But as the judge later correctly notes, by carrying a knife himself, Harry is not part of the solution, but part of the problem. If suddenly everyone is running around with a weapon, others feel compelled to imitate them so as not to be seen as weaker. Although the ideal scenario, of course, would be for no one to be walking around town with a hunting knife. Because even if you only intend to use such a thing for self-defense, in the heat of the moment, especially as an untrained person, you have absolutely no way of knowing where the blade might end up. The judge presiding over the trial against Harry sums it up this way: "I emphasize that a misguided sense of self-defense is never a good reason to carry a knife. The reality is that carrying a knife makes a young man more likely to get involved in a dangerous altercation, not less likely." There were many onlookers on Primrose Hill, including families with children. There were even uniformed officers standing right nearby. Harry had no reason to stab Harry straight in the neck with a knife, despite the scuffle that preceded it. He says he ran away on the spur of the moment because of the police officers standing nearby, and because he happened to be holding the very knife that had just been used to injure Harry. At first, he had hidden it under a trash can a few streets away from Primrose Hill. Later, he retrieved the weapon from under the trash cans and called the friend who had sold him the knife earlier in the middle of the night. Then he returned the knife to him, thus getting rid of the murder weapon. He also disposed of the clothes he was wearing during the crime. When he realized he had seriously injured Harry, not only did he fail to get help, but he also ran away and devised a plan to dispose of the murder weapon. The judge says he does not believe Harry had the knife with him that evening with the intent to take someone's life. But the moment he pulled the weapon from its sheath, he accepted that risk. The 12-member jury deliberated for nearly 8 hours. In the end, a verdict was reached by a clear majority of 11-1. Harry Lloyd Hall is guilty of the murder of Harry Pitman. The sentence will be announced in November 2025. Harry will spend at least 14 years in prison. The now 18-year-old can therefore be released on parole at the earliest when he is 32, provided he behaves well in prison. If Harry works on himself, he can get a second chance as an adult. Harry Pitman cannot. He lost his life because of a harmless scuffle and a reckless act by a peer. At the end of 2024, it was announced that Primrose Hill would remain closed on New Year's Eve 2024 to 2025. That was also the case this year, from the 25th to the 26th. While this isn't a direct consequence of Harry Pitman's murder, it undoubtedly contributed to the decision.
What are your thoughts on this case, especially regarding the knife incident?
By the way, leaving a comment also supports the channel, because any interaction increases the likelihood that the video will be recommended to people who haven't subscribed to Insolito yet. Other than that, there isn't much more to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, whichever time you're watching the video, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, ciao everyone.